Well, welcome back. It's time for another set of conversations. We're lighting the candle, a world that works. And our conversations are really non-specific, but we're really looking for access to empowerment, encouragement, a whole lot of E-words. And we've been focusing on E-words for several months. The interesting part of all of that is that when we look at what happens with human beings, and we look at the words that are mostly in front of us in the media and in social media, I wonder, are there other forces at work here that are really not about empowerment? So I wonder, again, I'm looking at the list that we got from, at least I got from Vanessa, and I would be interested in doing a couple of different words today. And not that we have to do a word every single time we get together, but from the list, we've got beyond effortless, enrichment, evangelize, equilibrium, energy, existential, essential, elevate, elaborate, enamor, educate, excel, eradicate. Now, see, forever and a day, we could be kind of pivoting off of an E word. And Ken, were there any of those that really kind of called to you? You want me to read some more?
Yeah, go ahead, read a few more.
Let's look at elemental, end, evaporate, endow, entertain, ebb and flow, ellipsis, equestrian, emergent, enclave, empathetic versus empathy. We've been down that one. And then et cetera. I think et cetera is one where you find the rest of infinity.
Emergent is an interesting one.
Yeah, we were talking about that last week. So why don't we start off? Do you have something to say about emergent, Ken?
Well, it's just it comes up a lot. Actually, I have a friend who's I'm helping him design a course right now, and it's called Trust the Emergent. And and it's really it's interesting, and it does kind of link into what we talked about last week. The idea is it's already all there. It's just allowing it literally to emerge, and trusting that process is what this gentleman is working on. So, and he connects it to, some pretty cool things with the five elements. But really all he's doing is helping you figure out how to open your own doorways to your best, highest self, So that word I like that word.
Interesting. So going back and actually looking at the two variations of emergent, one being an adjective, the other one being a noun. So if something is an emergent, say technology, it's in the process of coming into being or becoming prominent, which means that in many cases it's created a whole domain of study and inquiry and lots of room for people to get it right and get it wrong in terms of saying what it is. That we're so famous for having to name something and define it, and that's where the conversations get pretty interesting. And then there's the noun, an emergent property, for example, like knowledge is an emergent of this interactive process, the whole domain of knowledge. And then in ecology, an emergent tree or other plant, emergent tower above the top canopy. I've never heard of that, being used in that particular instance, so that's kind of neat. But emergent does seem to be like a standout. There's something because of its newness, its freshness is like, what's up with that? What is possible if we are able to examine something that is for example, an emergent philosophy. And what you're talking about, the language is all there. The words, are there any new words that have to be, coined in order to have a quality conversation about an emergent philosophy? Well, in many cases, yes. And the words become associated with that philosophy. And then before you know it, people are using those words either in good context or in poor context, as if they know what they're talking about. And I think that's one of the neat things about anything that seems to be emergent. So you're working with a man, and if you get into it just a little bit deeper, what kind of technology is he talking about?
How do you mean by technology? Like
Well,
the
it could be a philosophical approach. It could be.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so he's a very, like a lot of people that I'm working with right now, they have decades of deep study and practice in especially various Eastern wisdom traditions, as well as shamanistic traditions and all that kind of stuff. So this one's geared around the five elements
Yep.
and how each one is kind of associated with a different, like fire has to do with creation and air has to do with change. So he's just really creating a framework, kind of like what we do with Questor's Way. We've move, think, connect, feel, empower. There are five areas of your life that you now have an anchor, a focal point, and then you can go deeper, wide in each of those areas. So, and what he's looking to do is he likes our learning model where it's very experiential and also very much about human interaction and like the sharing and connecting like we do here. So, but the actual, like the structure of it is based around the five elements, out of a lot of the Eastern traditions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's also kind of interesting looking further into emergence and what that would mean. From a philosophical standpoint, it has to do with systems theory, science, art, and emergence occurs when an entity is observed to have properties in its parts that they do not have it on their own. So that when you put those five elements together, that something new comes out of that, and what that is the emergence of those other core elements coming together in a new and very positive way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I actually can give you another example of it that happened yesterday with fifth graders. So I was doing a workshop. For a lot of years, I do enrichment programs for kids all the way up through high school, through EastCon. And so this was through Zoom, which, obviously is a little bit different, but also kind of the norm, the way things are right now. But they were working on five animal stuff. So basically it's learning about mindsets that are related to the five animal kung fu. So, and what was interesting was, for example, we're connecting them to the part of them that learns how to listen and deal with situations that come and go in their life with grace and balance. And we refer to that as the crane. So they're learning about these physical movements of the crane, and they're moving their arms like wings. But what they're really doing is recognizing this capacity they have in themselves to be a balanced, graceful listener, both for themselves and for others. So they're recognizing their ability to strengthen their relationship with themselves and others through this emerging paradigm of crane as this kind of cool karate animal that's actually a lot more than that. Yeah. So, and it was really cool watching them make comments and chats and stuff like that, based on that.
Very interesting. Vanessa, do you have any thoughts on the subject?
No, it's very interesting. I know Shelley had mentioned it last week, just kind of throwing it out there as an E-word. I think that's where I had heard it, and it's not a word that I'm very familiar with, but listening to what you're all saying, I know when I first heard the word just from Shelley texting or whatever she had said, she had mentioned it, and because I think she said something about having I don't know, something to do with her schedule. And I don't remember exactly how she phrased it, but I was thinking right away, I thought, oh, she had a lot of important things to attend to, as in like a lot of emergencies that came up, putting fires throughout her day. So that was going, whenever I heard the word, that's what I was thinking of. And I, again, without looking further into it. So listening to what you guys are saying is very interesting. And it sounds to me like it's, I'm almost thinking of like, like whenever you're maybe from philosophical, standpoint, maybe whenever you're sitting and thinking about something, pondering something, maybe meditating or praying or whatever, from a spiritual basis, perhaps, whatever kind of, like in that stillness, like we'll take meditation, for example, like in that stillness where, answers start to maybe come about or more questions, and kind of like whatever sort of ideas, maybe even, but questions, answers sort of float to the top, the ones that kind of sit at the top of your consciousness, or we'll say consciousness, but as you're kind of sitting in that space, with your own thoughts, and then maybe the thoughts kind of mix with feelings. So again, it's whatever kind of fits with your lungs, whatever emerges. I'll use that word in context. But that's how I'm beginning to understand it. And so it's a word I certainly appreciate. And I thought it was just, it seems like a very important word. So I'll keep listening to what else you guys have to say about it. But that's my contribution right now.
Yeah, as I'm reading further and looking at other definitions of the word, the whole idea of where we are right now in the seasons with the emergent greenery, where we've got a lot of budding on trees and things that are not quite ready to bloom yet. And there's a distinction between emergent, properly meaning that something is emerging, and normally refers to events that are just beginning. They're barely noticeable rather than catastrophic. So it means, beginning to arise, and by contrast, emergency means arising unexpectedly, and maybe, with some consequence, right? So when you're thinking about the word emergent in, let's say, community conversations, let's say we're talking about things in the headlines that human beings have to deal with on a local level, with their communities, things that are not functioning well. Like, for instance, the types of conversations that go on with a school board, talking about how do we get the schools opened back up in such a way that all the participants, everyone who's part of the whole community and the whole culture around education, are equally empowered. And what I hear and what I see in the reports about it is it's rare that anybody comes at it from that standpoint. They come at it from a positionality where you have to almost look at emergent as being something that has to be nurtured and invited and perhaps helped along in the early stages. And I'm looking out my window right now. We have these amazing star magnolia trees that are like 25 feet tall. When we planted them 35 years ago, we never really expected them to get anywhere near, the height that they are right now, but they are peppered. I mean, absolutely peppered with blossoms. And we've watched those go from buds to a couple of, branches with some blossoms on them. And then it's looked that way for the last month. The weather has kept these trees completely confused about when it was time to really, for spring to spring, right? They're springing now. Now, by contrast, the pink magnolias that we have, they're not close. I don't think we'll see them for another 2 to 3 weeks. But the interesting part of it is that my entire backyard is all gray. A lot of trees that have buds on them where leaves are going to happen one of these days, if it's like last year and the year before. But the magnolias are on a completely different schedule. They're on a completely different time frame. And I wonder if conversations in many ways have exactly the same problem. That not only does there have to be a causal effect for an idea to become emergent, but it also has to be kind of like the main focus of the conversation, for example. Who's got experience in that area?
Well, but it just kind of strikes me, actually, you're right. And I guess the emergent is the deeper, like there's an interesting thing, like whenever there's a complex problem, the default of the human brain is to try to simplify it.
Yes.
Right. So, so when you simplify it, now you're talking about a position or an opinion or a perspective, or repeating something that you've heard from, some other source that you've taken as true. So, and it stays on the surface like that. So, so education's an interesting one. What would happen if you started from reaching an agreement that a safe, positive, productive learning environment for everyone is the core goal?
Yeah.
So not how much money there is, or what the taxes are, or what the teachers need, or whether there's masks or social distance, all that kind of stuff. It's just, what does that look like? Is that important, as a thing to work towards? So as far as the trees go, is there value in the trees blooming? Just let's start there. And then, now it becomes a curious thing. Isn't that interesting how the magnolias are in a different cycle? Instead of staking some kind of claim on your thought process for why that is or what it means, So, and it's just, and I think that's, the thought of emergent is, going deep enough to where there's for school, some protective instinct that we all share to nurture children in a way that's going to allow them to become successful adults. Can we get to that place and then build on that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
philosophical conversations that we used to have back in the 1990s would be based on three premise sentences. So the first premise is that there are things that are knowable and sayable, and there are things that are unknowable and unsayable. And all breakthroughs come when the unknowable and the unsayable are sayable. So those three sentences create the landscape to have conversations where you can have very, very skinny branches. And the whole goal of the conversation is not to have a point, having a point is like the booby prize, But if there's a particular share that comes from deep inside you that has not necessarily been expressed in language to people before, and it connects with people, and then they stand on top of that to provide their insights and the rest of it. And it was the example that we used to use. Have you ever sat in a Quaker meeting room?
No.
If you haven't, the rule that silence is something that should remain unspoiled, and so the thoughts that come are typically ones where the speaker, there's attention's never on themselves. They're never trying to do something to create a relationship with the listener, other than to share what they're feeling is a word from the divine spirit. And so, I did sit through one experience that was like that, and essentially in about an hour, there were not more than 6 or 7 sentences that were uttered aloud. And I can't tell you if that was what a Quaker meeting, it was all about or not, but that was the relationship from my own experience that I had. And what I also remember is feeling at the end of that hour, the opportunity to be with my own thoughts, there's a great philosopher who once said that it takes a really special person to be able to stand the sound of their own thoughts. And so if you stop and think about, the folks that have this relationship with being able to be with, and our resident librarian went and looked up the word for me. Thank you, Vanessa. Equanimity. Are you familiar with that, Ken?
Yeah, I couldn't put a definition to it, but yes.
Well, I couldn't when Ted Hsu said it to me either. I had to go look it up. I said, what are you up to these days? He says, equanimity. Mental calmness, composure, and evenness of temper, especially in difficult situations.
Okay.
She accepted both the good and the bad with equanimity. So that's kind of neat.
Stoic. Yeah, that's the Stoic tradition.
Yeah, so you learn enough about a word by hearing the definition, but again, comparing and contrasting the synonyms: composure, calmness, calm, level-headedness, self-possession, self-control, even-temperedness, coolness, cool-headedness, presence of mind, serenity, placidity, tranquility. A lot of words ending in Y, but the neat part of it is that there are people who, in every situation, are only looking for, where's balance? Where in this do I find my quietness and find my calmness that I can bring to the situation, first for my own benefit, then for the benefit of those around me? The other one, in a mob of chaos, the person who remains calm is in charge. Have you heard that?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
So what's really kind of neat about all of what we're talking about today is emergence can go unnoticed. Emergence almost it's like a guppy in a shark tank, not even a whole snack. It's just, you're either going to be listening for it or it's going to disappear until it comes out and emerges again.
I guess the question is, does your lens allow for the idea that you're just in a constant state of emerging? Whether we notice it or not, it's always there. It's always happening.
Yes.
And once in a while, you just take a look, you're just living your life. So we're not, the idea of being self-aware all the time, I think is, not really something that actually doesn't sound like much fun.
Well,
I would be aware of what's going on around me too, and just finding, that balance you were talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of walking around going, what's up with that? What's up with that? What's up with that?
Yeah.
Over and over and over again. So it might be something for which there's a time and a place. And as we carve out Thursday morning for our time and place to more or less kind of have at, what are words in terms of their ability to be tools? What are words in terms of their ability to be building blocks, or possibly the glue that holds things together and allows people to go from a state of no agreement to a state of partially understanding to a state of recreating what the possibility is to a state of living the possibility. And so each of those things, if you stop and think about learning in education, and the whole idea that some people are teachers or masters and other people are students, or or the people that are learning the technology to carry it on in their own lives. If you think about all of that, it would be very special to be around somebody who's always a teacher. And I agree with you, could be quite tedious and tiresome. I think I've had enough lessons for one day. Let's just move on to something a little less, heady or concerning or what have you. But if you look at, people that are living in a situation, they can't escape the extremes where they live in, like, for instance, in inner city Chicago. My experience with Chicago has never been in the inner city there. However, have I been in South Boston and Roxbury and, those sort of things in the 1990s when they thought it was unacceptable that they had 90 shootings in a year? you know?
Yeah.
Can you even imagine? But the hard part and the best part was just how it seemed to me when we got to speak with the community people, when we got to speak with the people who were just going about living out their lives, and the kids that were home from school in the afternoon, and their parents instructed them, when you're at home, you're to lie on the floor and do your homework. You know, didn't want them to be shot by a stray bullet coming through a window or even coming through a wall because they were sitting up at a table or something. And there was no sense of resignation. You know, there was no sense from the people that were there. This was their community and they wanted it back. You know what I mean? So as time went on and the lawlessness of the situation, and as gangs did what gangs did, and their whole philosophy was that a 21-year-old is a very old man, you know, in the inner city, you know, that their expectation was not to get out of the teens. And they were at war every day of their life. And that's why, you know, the whole incarcerating 2 million Americans to take them off the street and put them in timeout, they didn't really do much with them while they had them in timeout, but that was where all that came from. But that said, you know, I'm just sharing with you my recollection of people who broke down and cried and said, this was, when I was growing up, this was a great place to live. And through the 70s and the 80s, it's deteriorated. And how do we go back to what it used to be? I didn't hear any of them say, I'm packing my bags and leaving. This was their home. This was where they were going to stay. So what does that have to do with emergent? And what does that have to do with that other really cool word, equanimity? The whole idea is that both of those can be personal conversations, or they can be group and community conversations. And in the meantime, if it's left to somebody other than the people in the conversation to decide what the conversation is about, I think what we're seeing is there's an M word, manipulation. It's for profit. It's for some other reason other than making the world a better place, by and large. So I toss that out there, not because I believe that it's absolutely true, but the evidence that I see in terms of media and social media, which I don't really spend hardly any time on at all, other than being on Facebook and loving, giving hearts to everything that I possibly can all day long. I don't know. So what's the usefulness of these two concepts?
Got something, Vanessa?
No, go ahead.
I guess the only thing that struck, well, there are lots of thoughts floating around in there, but you know, thinking about, an emergent would be a focus, instead of going back to what was, to recognize the value that was inherent in what was, and then bringing to life what's now possible, you know? So, and I wonder if, you know, that book, I can't remember who wrote it, Upstream, was just so great. And it always strikes me, just looking at when something goes wrong, whether it's politically or, you know, someone does something wrong, or things end up in the wrong space. There's all of this dialogue around who's to blame, what should have been done differently, you know, all that kind of stuff. And the reality of it is, it's just, you can't always know, you know, like how things are going to end up where they are. So if you have the equanimity to just see that as information and feedback, and of course, make sure that there's consequences for people who, you know, who failed or created, you know, situations that were not appropriate, that's fine. But that's an aside, you know, I mean, you know, what is what could come from this? What's the, it's like that Chinese symbol opportunity, or I'm sorry, crisis, which also can mean opportunity riding a dangerous wind. So, so you got a crisis in front of us. What's beneath that can now come out of that? The lotus plant, grows from the mud, grows in the worst conditions. You have this beautiful flower that blooms, but if you just focus on the mud and being angry that someone made the mud, or, someone stepped in the mud, or, someone told you it wouldn't be mud and it was mud, and, that's what we hear. So, so I don't know.
Yes. And I have to agree with you 100%. The first thrownness and reaction by a group of people is to lay blame and to name people as the problem, and to name people as, how they are, like a fixed inanimate object made of stone. That's exactly what and how and who they are, which really doesn't make anything possible. There's no conversation that goes beyond being called a name unless you agree with that and you absorb it and you say, yes, I can see how you would feel that way. Now what? Typically, people aren't wired, to behave that way. And the funny part of it is that if you've studied logic at all, then there's a rule, a foundational rule that basically says you cannot prove a negative. There's no proof for a negative. Something either exists or it doesn't exist. But you can't prove that something doesn't exist. If you think for a moment, most of the work that's going on a daily basis is a group of people saying, this is how it is. And another group of people saying, no, it's not that way. That's not true. As opposed to a group of people saying, here's what we want. And the rest of the people saying, how do we get it?
Well, and even just someone says, this is how it is, wouldn't a better response be, that's interesting. What's brought you to see it that way? What explain to me, your perspective, your point of view,
Right.
and even then, someone may ask that, and what are they really doing? They're trying to maneuver the person into seeing it their way instead of just being open,
Right.
So, and it's hard because especially if you're feeling like you're in crisis, if you're afraid of a consequence, of course you're going to deflect, you're going to justify, defend, or assign blame, because it stinks when you screw up and now you got to pay for that, especially if you didn't mean to screw up, which happens to us all the time. So, it's actually one of our little mantras is just own it. It just doesn't matter whether it's fair or not, just own it. And now let's go a little deeper and figure out what's going to grow from that mud. That's hard to do though.
It's extremely hard to do. And the more ground that you take in terms of being inured, to a thrownness, to wanting to defend yourself, there's always that little bit that's left behind, that new place that nobody knew how to poke at before. And when they discover it, it's like, oh, I didn't know that was there.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can hear us at exvadio.com/podcasts, Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts.